lovely poem, milady. Wow, aren't we lucky to have heard that original recording from 1512 of a woman getting a perm in a hair salon. Amazing to think that perms existed back then, and I for one would love to know more about the creepy hairdresser giving that perm. Fabulous stuff. Hello there, and welcome back to the final couplet with me, Theo Cowan. We're on to Sonnet 73 today, and yes, I looked ahead again, it's a two-parter. Shakespeare's very into his two-part sonnets at the moment, but he doesn't like to mention that they're a two-parter until you start reading the next sonnet, and it turns out it's a direct continuation on from the previous one, which is annoying, and I wished that one of his friends at the time had told him that that was annoying. But here we are. So good to know that Sonnet 73 is a two-parter, and it might even be a three-parter or a four-parter. I haven't looked that far ahead. That's crazy. I'm not going to do that much research. And as I read this, you will probably notice, if you've listened to any of the other sonnets that I've done, there will be some familiar themes cropping up, as there always is with Shakespeare. He likes to write about the same things, just putting them in different ways, which is nice. And the themes of this one, you're talking old age, you're talking the seasons, you're talking fire, the elements. So some classics cropping up. Let's take a listen, shall we? Sonnet 73. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day, as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self, that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceiv'st, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. So there we have it, Sonnet 73. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, had sonnets quite similar to this one. I can't think of them off the top of my head. Maybe you can. But, you know, he's talking about getting old again, and how he is like autumn turning into winter, and winter, as we know from previous Shakespeare sonnets, he likens to death a lot. So here he's talking really about his twilight years, and he mentions twilight. Maybe actually twilight years comes from Shakespeare. Hold on, let me just check that. Right, I'm back. I just checked whether twilight years originated from Shakespeare, and it says, the internet says, Shakespeare did use twilight in Sonnet 73, which we're looking at now, of course, but the term twilight years he never used. So, you know, he might have inspired the term, but didn't use it, so that's good to know. So these last few sonnets have all been around death, which Shakespeare does like to do every now and again in these sonnets. He likes to clump a bunch of them together and just have a nice sombre time thinking about death and old age. But he also brings love into death and beauty into death. And of course the last few sonnets have all been about when he dies, for his lover to forget about him, to just forget his name, because that'll be easier. So let's dive into this line by line and work out what the hell Shakespeare was going on about in Sonnet 73. So we start with, that time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon these boughs which shake against the cold. We'll stop there. That's 3 lines, sorry, not 1. But it's all one thought, as I like to say. And here he's saying, when you look at me, alright, you see autumn, the time of year when the leaves are yellow or not there at all, or there's a few of them and they are hanging on these branches which shake against the cold. So it's that time of year when autumn is just about to finish, actually, and we are about to dive into winter. And here he changes his mind. I like to think of this as changing his mind. He's saying when yellow leaves, or none, or a few, doesn't matter. But you know the time of year he's trying to get at. I'd say if he was going to make some edits to this or some cuts, he'd probably just need to say when the leaves are yellow. Don't need to say or none or few. You know, we get it. We get the time of year. Then we continue with the same thought. Bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. So he's saying that the branches are empty and once sweet birds sang upon them. You know, not long ago really, when you think about it. Just like a couple of months ago. In me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west. So now he's talked about the seasons and how he's sort of at the end of autumn, about to dive into winter, which we know he likes to use as death. And now he's talking about where he is in the day. So he's saying, you'll see in me the twilight of the day. So towards the end, when the sunset is fading in the west. So right at the end of the day. And you know what happens when we plunge into darkness? That's death. He's talked about this before in previous sonnets. Which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self that seals up all the rest. So he's continuing that same thought, and he's saying when the sun is just about to set, and it's soon to be replaced by the black of night, which is like death, putting everything to rest. And now he moves on to another comparison. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie. So now he's saying he's like sort of the end of a fire, the dwindling part of a fire, the remains that are still glowing on top of the ashes of its youth. So you know when you look at a fire and there's just the sort of dwindling flames that are on top of the ashes, and those ashes were once a raging fire. So he's comparing that to his life, really. You know, he's this dwindling flame that was once a lovely, warm, fiery beast, you know, full of life. As the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. So continuing with the fire analogy, this flame is on top of its own deathbed, on which it must burn out, consuming what used to fuel it. So, to put it simply, he's saying he's on his last legs. All of those lines are just to say, look, I'm coming to the end of my days here. And now, of course, we're on to the final couplet. This thou perceiv'st, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. And this for me is a great final couplet. I think he's really nailed it with this one. So he's saying to his lover, you see all these things. You see that I'm at the end of my days here. You know, I haven't got that long left. And that makes your love even stronger, because you love more deeply what you will soon lose, which is such a sad thought, but also quite beautiful, isn't it? What a nice final couplet. Sometimes he leaves us on a bit of a sad, pathetic note with his final couplets, but for this one, I think it's quite beautiful, isn't it? He's saying you recognise all this in me, and yet you still love me, and that makes your love even stronger, which is nice. Well done, Shakespeare. You've come up with something very nice there. So that there is Sonnet 73. And it's all about Shakespeare's twilight years. He's getting old. I wonder how old he was when he actually wrote this. In my head, he's not actually that old. But you know, back then people died much younger, and they died of random little ailments. So he's probably just prepping for a horrible little disease that will kill him off. But he's not 70, is he? He's not 80. He's probably only 40s, which is crazy to be saying this sort of stuff, like I'm in the twilight of my life. And again, it brings up the question of how young his lover is. He keeps saying that he's way older than him and that he's going to die first. So God knows how old his lover is, but he's seeming quite young. And as I've said before, let's hope it's not under the legal age. And on that note, I think it's about time we add this Sonnet 73 to our story. And if you'll remember last week, Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe, forgot his name for a second there. Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe are travelling back from Barbados on a boat. And Shakespeare, he fell ill and then he miraculously recovered. But in a cruel twist of fate, as Shakespeare was hoisting the sails to continue their course to London, he got caught in a bit of rope and was hung out over the sea, and there were sharks that were circling and they were about to bloody eat him, which is crazy. Who created this story? But because he's Shakespeare, he had to read a sonnet, didn't he? As he was being circled by sharks, he had to read Sonnet 72 to Christopher Marlowe. And that is where we left off. Let's see how Sonnet 73 fits into all this, shall we? Shakespeare finished reading Sonnet 72 to Christopher Marlowe, and the rope that was holding him above the sharks was about to snap. And Christopher Marlowe says, "That was really great, Shakespeare, but time is of the essence here. That rope is about to snap." And Shakespeare said, "Yes, I know, but I had to read that to you because I wanted to get that off my chest. That's something I wrote earlier about death, all right? So just think about that if I do die." And the rope suddenly snapped. Shakespeare fell into the water infested with sharks. There was thrashing. Water was being thrown in all directions. At one moment, a shark would be on top of Shakespeare. The next, Shakespeare would be on top of the shark. It was mayhem. And then suddenly silence. All quiet on the Western Front. Great movie and book. The sea was calm. Christopher Marlowe ran to the edge of the boat. "Shakespeare, Shakespeare," he called out. "Are you there?" No answer. And then suddenly, bursting out of the sea, almost like a dolphin, William Shakespeare appeared, with a shark's head in his hand. He clambered back aboard the boat, and Christopher Marlowe stood in shock and awe. He said, "Bloody hell, Shakespeare, you just killed a shark. I thought you were dead out there." And Shakespeare said, "I would never die like that, Christopher. I love you too much to have died in such a dishonourable way." They embraced, both of them, relieved after the day's intense events. They set sail again for London. This time there were no hiccups, and weeks went past. They spent lovely quality time together, playing Uno and Monopoly Go, and all sorts of fun little games. One night, just off the coast of Spain, Christopher Marlowe lay curled up in bed, and Shakespeare was in the ensuite bathroom on board. He was looking at himself in the mirror. God, he had a wrinkly face. Age had beaten the hell out of him, and he thought to himself, you know, after that terrible illness and the shark attack, I realise that I'm not immortal, and I'm getting older, and eventually I will die, and that time might be sooner than I think. And then he looked over at the sleeping Christopher Marlowe, all beautiful in his youth, but crucially over the age of 18. So it was all above board. And Shakespeare thought, it's quite incredible, isn't it? How he stuck with me. Even though I nearly died twice. How he knows that there's a chance I may die tomorrow. But yet he's still here with me. I mean, admittedly we're on a boat and he can't get away from me, but still, it's clear that he loves me. And these two near-death experiences have only increased his love for me, I think. I feel a sonnet coming on. And with that, he ran over to his little writing desk that he had on board and scrawled down Sonnet 73. When he finished, it was morning, and Christopher Marlowe awoke, bleary-eyed. Shakespeare was very close to him, watching over him. Christopher Marlowe said, "Oh, bloody hell, Shakespeare, you scared me. What are you doing? What are you doing looking at me like that?" And Shakespeare said, "I've been up all night, writing a lovely sonnet." Christopher Marlowe said, "Oh, another sonnet, is it? Great. Well, I really look forward to hearing that at some point." And Shakespeare said, "Well, I must read it to you now, actually, because it's quite important. It's about me getting older and death and stuff like that." Christopher Marlowe said, "Oh, it's quite early in the morning, Shakespeare. Actually, I don't know if I want to talk about death right now. And actually, I wondered if I might be able to read you some of my writing, because I'm actually also a writer." And Shakespeare said, "Yeah, you can read that to me at some point, for sure, definitely. Maybe a bit later, after some coffee and stuff, but let me just read this to you now, because this is actually probably better than your writing and more important." Christopher Marlowe sighed and just thought, well, I better let him get on with it. And with that, Shakespeare pulled Sonnet 73 from his back pocket and read. Sonnet 73. When you look at me, you will see autumn, the time of year when the leaves are yellow or have fallen away, leaving bare branches shaking in the cold where sweet birds recently sang. You can see in me the twilight that remains, when the sun has set, soon to be replaced by black night, like death, putting everything to rest. You can see in me the remains of a fire, still glowing on top of the ashes of its youth, lying on top of the deathbed on which it must burn out, consuming what used to fuel it. You see all this, and it makes your love for me stronger, because you love more deeply what you will soon lose. So there we have it, the story behind Sonnet 73. Let's hope that next week they get off that bloody boat, because it seems to be a death trap. And you know what? We still haven't found out why Christopher Marlowe had to flee London. And if he's going to be alright when they return. I mean, are the authorities going to be after him? Are the mafia going to be after him? I don't know, but I'm worried. So until next week, bye.